Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first webinar in our E911 webinar series. My name is Angela McPherson, and I'm the Marketing Manager at Waterfield Technologies. Today's session is all about 911 compliance. We'll be covering laws, deadlines, penalties, and what you need to know and do now to become E911 compliant. Just a heads up, today's session is being recorded. Everyone will be receiving a link to the on-demand session in the very near future, so please keep an eye out for that. Some of you did have some questions when you registered for the webinar. We will be answering those for you at the very end of our session. And if you think of additional questions as we go along, please be sure to drop those into the chat, and we'll try to get to those at the very end. Just another heads up, you will be receiving an invite in the very near future to the second webinar in our E911 series, where we'll be having a panel discussion and we will be showcasing one of our clients' E911 implementation. So keep an eye out for that as well. Now, without further ado, please allow me to introduce you to Kevin Quito. Kevin is the president and CEO of 911 Secure. He's been in the 911 industry for over 15 years now. His company, 911 Secure, is credited with creating the first next generation 911 solution. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Angela. Thanks for having me here today. Really appreciate it.
Yes, of course. So let's get started with our presentation.
Okay, and so the first thing that we're actually going to talk about is really what is E911, because I know that there's some people out there who really don't even know what the difference between a regular 911 solution where you can make 911 calls from your site and then what information gets to the public safety answer point. So we want to make sure that everybody's just on the same page here. So if you look at this little diagram here, we have company, the 911 service provider, the E911 selector tandem router, and the PSAP. And so when somebody makes a 911 call without E911, the information that the PSAP is going to receive is just the general address and the main list billing telephone number of wherever the company is located at. So like what Angela's showing here is, this is just the main address, phone number, but that bottom part there, the North Gate Building 2, Floor 3, Northeast, that's really what E911 is. It's just filling in address line 2, and that's what gives the public safety answer point that little bit more information to be able to get to the emergency. So rather than just having a general address, they'll get the more specific location information of where that call is coming from. And then the other big part of this too is if say you have multiple sites or if you have people who are working remotely, we're also going to make sure that the correct address is given to the 911 operator, because that's one of the big problems when you start having a dispersed network where you have like kind of a hub and spoke scenario where you have a main site and then you have remote sites. And again, with COVID, all the people working remotely, you want to make sure that the call gets routed to the correct public safety answer point and also gives the correct address of where the call is coming from. Okay. And then one of the big things that we're talking about with everybody lately is the U.S. legislation requirements. There's two big laws. Kari's law is the first one. There was a deadline of February 16th of 2020. And there's three requirements when it comes to Kari's law. The first one being direct access to 911, meaning that there's no 9 or no access line needed. The users should be able to just pick up any phone and dial 911, and the call should make it to the public safety answer point. And that's really actually the second part of Kari's law is calls need to route to the local public safety answer point. They don't want those calls to be routed to like a front desk or on-site security. And the biggest reason for that is because, if say we see this with hospitals sometimes where they'll have those calls triaged, but if that site isn't manned 24/7, there's possibility that those calls could maybe go to voicemail or something like that. They really want those calls to route to the public safety answer point. And then the last one is on-site notification, making sure that people on site are notified that 911 has been called. Because one of the worst things that could happen is somebody makes a 911 call, police, fire, and ambulance show up at a front desk, and the front desk or the on-site security is like, why are you guys here? And so they really don't want that to happen. They want the people to be almost just start to address the emergency. And the worst case scenario, they can meet police, fire, and ambulance at some location and then either guide them to the emergency or give them a map or something along those lines. So that's one of the reasons why on-site notification is so important. And then the second one is Ray Baum Act. There's two deadlines when it comes to Ray Baum Act. The first one being the beginning of this year for fixed phones, and then the second part of it is for non-fixed phones at the beginning of next year. Now, while there isn't real great definition on what a fixed phone versus a non-fixed phone is, most of our customers look at fixed phones as the wired phones, digital, analog, IP phones that are hardwired in. And then everything that's a wireless phone would be, connected to wireless access points, or people who are using soft phones on laptops would be non-fixed. But in really, all you have to think about is, hey, at the end of this year, beginning of next year, really you have to cover every single phone that's connected to your phone system, regardless of whether it's a wired or a wireless phone. And there's only one requirement when it comes to Ray Baum's Act, and that's to provide dispatchable location to the PSAP. And that's kind of what I was showing before on the E911 solution, is giving that address line too, giving that additional information about where the call is coming from within the building, rather than just a general address of where the call is coming from. And we want to talk about what dispatchable location actually is. Here, if you want to, Angela, if you want to click on, there's one more little blurb that pops up here. Yeah, like I said, just fill address in, it just equates to filling in that address line too. And the description on what dispatchable location is, it's completely up to the company to determine what that is. If we talk about some of our customers, we have one casino that's going to be that we're currently implementing, where that's a giant casino, but they only have 4 dispatchable locations, and they're basically going to be saying, all right, if it's coming from the West Wing, that's who we're going to be. That's the loading dock that we're going to be providing for the PSAP to dispatch people to. And then we're going to also be providing that on-site notification alert that gives people on site that more specific location information, exactly which hotel room the call is coming from. And then they're going to meet police, fire, and ambulance at that loading dock and either escort them to the actual place of where the call is coming from, or again, give them a map or something along those lines. And then you go again to the other end of the spectrum, where we have some school districts where they want to know specifically which room the call is coming from. So really, it's up to you. It's a little bit of common sense and a little bit of kind of planning on what kind of staff you have on site to determine what kind of dispatchable location you're going to be providing for your environment. Okay. So the one thing that comes up a lot are penalties. What's going to happen if I'm not compliant with Kari's law or Ray Baum's Act? And the first question always comes up, well, since this is a federal law, does the FCC have any fines attached to non-compliance? And yeah, there is. There's up to a $10,000 fine for, if you're caught, and then up to possibly a $500 a day fine from the FCC. I will say that the FCC so far has not said, okay, we're going to have a task force that is going to be going around and checking to make sure that companies are compliant with either Kari's law or Ray Baum's Act. Really, probably the most common ways that companies get quote unquote caught for being out of compliance with these laws is if somebody were to make a 911 call and that information, that dispatchable location wasn't presented to the PSAP could basically say, hey, we have this company, they made a 911 call here, and this is how you can get caught. And then obviously, like somebody within the company could be a whistleblower and say, hey, I work for this company and I know that we don't have a solution in place, and basically self-reporting. So those are the 2 ways that the FCC is levying fines. I will say also this, that there are some states that have specific legislation, and you can go to our website, nowinsecure.com, and check out the legislation page. Every single one of the states has its own, well, not every single state. There's probably about 20 or so states that have specific E911 legislation. Some of them have some different requirements. And there are some states that actually have the fire marshals going around and making sure that 911 can be called without a 9, and then also making sure that the 911 operator is getting that dispatchable location. Okay. And then the other big one is lawsuits. Really, these are one of the biggest reasons these 2 laws are in place, is to help the families of the victims of whoever was either died or was hurt because they weren't able to dial 911. And so with the example that we like to point out is with Kari Hunt, who was murdered, and what Kari's law was named after. The family sued and they were awarded $41.5 million. And so this is with no law in place. So it was a little bit more difficult for them. One of the things that we're hearing is a lot of companies are saying, you know what, if there's actual law in place, you may even be able to put a 1 in front of that 41. I mean, obviously I'm not a lawyer or anything, but this is just the feedback that we're hearing from a lot of our customers. And so that's one of the things that you want to make sure you're protecting yourself against, is those lawsuits from the families of whoever was hurt in your facility. And then the other big thing that comes up is liability insurance coverage. Well, I actually, when I first started doing this about 15 years ago, I was talking to a university and the guy was like, we have liability insurance for that. I was like, oh, great. Well, I'm gonna make sure my kids don't go there. And with liability insurance though, now, since there's an actual law, we're actually hearing this from our customers as well, that their liability insurance may not cover you anymore. Since you're basically breaking a federal law, and the reason that we have a picture of a sprinkler on here, we kind of give the example of, your sprinklers in your building, But if you don't hook up the water to those sprinklers and your building burns down, there's a very good chance, or most likely, that your fire insurance is not going to pay you any money because you didn't do your due diligence to make sure that that fire was put out in a timely manner. So it's kind of the same thing here. So that's something that you definitely want to talk to your liability insurance about, if that's what the upper manager is saying. Oh, we'll just have liability insurance cover it. This may end up coming out of the company's bottom line. And for small to medium sized businesses, $100 million lawsuit that can put them out of business. Okay. And then obviously the biggest one is the last one. It's loss of life. If something bad were to happen, all these other things, it's money, right? It's money can be remade, but life obviously can't. And so if something like that were to happen, that's the worst case scenario. When I first started doing this, again, way back in the early part of my career, I had proposed a solution to a company, and they said, "Oh, we're going to probably do this next year, maybe 2 years down the road or whatever." And then about 6 months later, they called me up and said, "Hey, we need to do something right now, today. We need to get this installed as quickly as possible." And what I found out was that somebody actually had to try to make a 911 call, and the call wasn't routed to the right place, and the lady ended up dying of a heart attack. And so it's something that I've always thought about and one of the reasons why we do what we do here at 911 Secure is because bottom line is we want to try and save as many lives as we possibly can. Okay. So these are some questions that we put together to ask when you're talking to E911 providers. These are some good things to find out and know. I mean, if we were doing a presentation for you, I would welcome these questions. And there's obviously, this isn't the complete list, but these are some of the ones that we put together. The first one: how does your solution make our organization compliant with Kari's Law and Ray Baum's Act? Seems pretty simple, but it's still a question that just needs to be answered. And I would think that most now providers are going to go through it and show you, hey, this is what we're going to do to make you compliant with these laws. But again, something that's pretty basic, but it should be asked. The next question is your solution a next generation 911 solution or an enhanced 911 solution? Angela mentioned off the top of the webinar here today that our solution is both an E911 solution, and we also were the first ones to ever do an NG911 call. This was about 2.5 years ago. And the reason we say this is because, yeah, E911 is the same thing that is required today, but there's a very good chance that next generation 911 solutions are going to be required in the future. And just to differentiate what the two are, E911 is basically, like I said before, filling in that address line 2, and the next generation solution is being able to send additional information to the PSAP. So it could be an IP camera feed, temperature sensor data, a map of the building, additional contact information, really almost anything else that you would think that would make sense for the PSAP to have to be able to go to that emergency quicker and go to that emergency with a little bit more information. Okay. Next question is, how do you provide coverage for remote workers? So this is obviously a big one with COVID. 2-3 years ago when we were doing this, customers would have maybe 5% of their workforce, or maybe even less than that of their workforce working remotely. And so I know that some companies in the past say, well, since it's such a small percentage, we just tell our users not to make 911 calls from their soft phones or those VPN hard phones. And really, that's not a solution anymore. I just yesterday was on a call with a customer, and we were talking about remote workers, and I was showing them our way of doing things, how the user is able to update their location information, automatically geolocate themselves. And they said, that's great that you have a solution, because we were talking to another provider, and they basically told us, just put a sticker on the laptop that says, don't use for 911 purposes. And I was like, wow, that's really not a solution. Anyway, I mean, again, maybe 10, 15 years ago when people were not using that as their phone, that might have been a way to mitigate it, but definitely not anymore. And the next question here is, when people are on site, does the user have to do anything? And what we mean by that is, users, when they're inside the facility, since you know your facility, the software or the solution should be able to automatically track those phones, whether a person physically picks up their phone and moves it, or logs out of a phone and logs in somewhere else. Really, that should all be automatic. Because if somebody goes to a conference room for just the day and they're sent an email or some text message or something like that, are they really going to be paying attention to that? Are they really going to be the one verifying that that's where they're at? Or and if they do, if that's the solution, well, who's liable? What if that person puts in the wrong information, and then the next person, somebody comes by their office and picks up their phone and dials 911, and the incorrect location information is outpulsed? Is it that user who put it in? Is it the company? Really, this should just be automatic, and the user should not have to do anything. I mean, people are busy enough as it is, rather than verifying their location information when they're on site. So then the next question that we're going to be talking about forgot here. Okay, does the software take over call control? And this is a big one. This has always been a big one for me. Is you want these 911 calls. I mean, arguably, not arguably, in my opinion, they're the most important calls that the PBX is ever going to be pushing out. And so we want to make sure that those calls are controlled by the PBX the entire time. Push it out. Once it goes to the outside world, then we can route the call from there. But as far as when it's still on the customer's site, we don't want that to be going to some other kind of a gateway or something like that, because it does introduce a possible point of failure. And if you talk to any E911 provider and they say, oh, no, it's not possible that it could fail, it is. And then the reason that they know that it is because they will always sell you two gateways. Because if one fails, then the other one, they need to fail it over to the other one. And if that failure doesn't happen, or maybe both of the boxes are down, then the call can maybe route to an emergency call response center. And it's just really, again, it's not some solution that I'm comfortable with, and really, I think our customers shouldn't be either. All right. And then the last question is, basically this comes down to costs. And the way that we charge for our solution, and the way that most of the companies that we really believe in charge for their solution, is by zone. And what we mean by that is, say you had a 10-story building and there was 1,000 phones within that building, and you wanted to report the granularity of the floor to the PSAP. So when somebody makes a 911 call, you're going to say this call is coming from the 3rd floor, 4th floor, whatever. That's really 10 zones. Really, that's 10 reporting zones. And that's what we'll charge you for, 10 reporting zones. We do know that there's other companies out there that will charge you 1,000 times. Even though the location information is going to be, say there's 100 phones per floor, all 100 of those phones are all going to be outpulsing, say, the 3rd floor. They're going to charge you still 100 times or 1,000 times if every single phone's in the building. And really, this dramatically reduces the cost of the solution, but you don't lose anything here. You're not losing any granularity that you're giving to the PSAP. So that's one of the big questions to ask and find out, hey, which way do you charge for your solution? Because again, it can save you a tremendous amount of money. So I think that we're ready for some questions. I know that we had some questions submitted ahead of time, Angela.
Yeah.
If you want to go over those first?
Sure.
Yeah.
So one of our participants would like to know if this solution, he's saying this solution is both cloud and on-premise. What is the advantage to this design?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the reason that the solution is designed that way is because, well, there's a few different reasons. So with the software doing IP discovery, if that were, say, in a cloud, you'd have to open up firewalls to the outside world. And I know that there's very few networking security company or divisions within a company that are going to allow something to come in and scan their entire network, because that's what you need to do. You need to be able to scan the network to be able to track when a phone moves from, say, the 1st floor to the 2nd floor, somebody logs out of a phone and logs in somewhere else. And so that's one of the reasons why we have the software on site, because it's something that is internal inside the firewall. So it's something that you can be protected by. But then the other big thing is, say you lost connection to the outside world, say your PRIs or your SIP trunks or something, for whatever reason, your calls weren't going out, but you still had power to the building, still power to the PBX, still power to the server that the software was loaded on. If somebody were to make a 911 call, our software would still be able to see that and still be able to alert people on site. So maybe that call doesn't actually make it out to the public safety answer point because you've lost connection to the outside world. We're still going to be able to alert people internally that, hey, there's an emergency going on, and either on-site security or whoever you're designated to deal with these emergencies on site will be able to get that. And then the other part of the actual routing of the 911 calls, the reason it needs to be in the cloud is going back to what I said very at the beginning with what E911 is. When you have that hub and spoke design, if you have a site that's outside of the same area of where the main PBX is housed, say it's in a different state, you need to be able to dynamically reroute that call to the correct servicing 911 center, so you don't have to have local trunks at each one of those sites. So with that part of the solution, we do need to be in the cloud. So again, we can dynamically route the call anywhere in the US or Canada, and it doesn't matter where the trunks are, and it doesn't matter where the actual call is coming from, and also for remote workers as well. Okay.
Next question is, talk about how smartphones will work.
So smartphones, that's a good question. So for the most part, you don't actually have to worry about smartphones. So if somebody has like say an Equinox or a Jabra client, something on their smartphone, if they make a 911 call, then that application will shut down. and it will use the native dialer to make that call. So then it's triangulating off the GPS coordinates, also off the towers, and also with a company called Rapid SOS that gives more pinpoint location information to the public safety answer point. But there are situations where customers say, you know what, we have some users who are maybe in a basement with no cell phone coverage, or we have some guys who have our offices up in the mountains or something like that. Washington State DOT is one of our customers, and they have these shacks up in the mountains where there's no cell phone coverage, but they do have wired internet and then also Wi-Fi there. And so there's a change that they can make on the back end to be able to say, you know what, if somebody makes an 911 call, it's going to be treated as a Wi-Fi device. So for the most part, you don't really have to worry about it. But if you choose to say, hey, we have these special case scenarios, you may want to be able to route those calls through the wireless access points.
Very good. What ACD, PBX, and CCAS solutions does this work with?
So really, pretty much everyone. I mean, there's parts of our solution that can work with any types of phone systems. I know that I can't say for every single one, because I know there's some off-brand PBXs out there that may not have the hooks so we can get into them. But really what we say with all this is, if you have a specific PBX in mind, please reach out to us and let us know which type it is, and we can get together with you and say, hey, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do, or this is maybe coming down the pike, that type of thing.
Great. Another viewer would like to understand the progress that CCAS providers are making as it relates to natively providing an E911 solution versus relying on a third-party PBX solution like Avaya Communication Manager, Microsoft Teams, etc.
Yeah, so that's another great question. So we actually are working with a lot of CCAS providers to actually provide our solution on the back end. So it may be that CCAS provider says, oh, we have E911 covered, it's inherent with our solution. We actually may be the driving force behind it. And so, yeah, there are companies that are saying, you know what, we need to have this, and we're getting contacted all the time to be able to provide a solution on the back end and white label it for them. So yeah, it is something that is out there for sure. I know Microsoft Teams, like they have two different flavors of their solution, where it's Microsoft Teams, where they provide dial tone, everything, the E911 solution, all that. And then there's the direct routing solution where you have to go out and find it yourself. So it's both, it's a little bit of both. And again, if you have any questions about it, please feel free to reach out.
Awesome. So those were all of the questions that we had submitted to us at registration. We did receive a couple more today. One of our viewers would like to ask, does the E911 system tap into the non-fixed system, phone or PC, GPS location to provide that dispatchable location information? And if not, does it require it if the location is variable?
So I guess we'll start with a person who's working on a soft phone on a laptop. And so if what we have is a product called Gatekeeper, and that gives the user the ability to update their location information themselves. And they can either pick an old saved address, say they've been there before, they can just click on a little button, or if they've never been there before, they can manually type their address information in. But this whole thing about geolocation, we actually have a button on there that says find me on a map. And what it actually does, it actually doesn't use GPS. It uses all the Wi-Fi signals that are around you. There's a kind of a little hidden secret that a lot of people don't know. Even the Wi-Fi signal in your house, it kind of knows where it's at. And the way that it does that is because since your cell phone has GPS in it, and it's always pinging you where you at. Once you hook up and your wireless access point sees you, it's basically sucks that location information out of there. And so we kind of leverage that with our Gatekeeper solution to be able to ping all the different Wi-Fi signals that are around you to be able to suck in, hey, and kind of give a confidence map to say, hey, we believe that you are here. So it kind of does a little bit of both of those things, where the user can manually type it in, or they can have that button where they find themselves.
This other question, you may have covered it a little bit with that last answer, but they're asking, how does remote location work when they have a physical phone at the remote worker's home, but they come into the office for a day and log into an office phone, i.e. the office phone took over the extension. Then they return back to the home office and log into the physical phone at home.
Sure. So this is a difficult way to answer this, because it's going to depend on the phone system. Each phone system is going to be a little bit different on how it does that. So really, this is something we need to have a follow-up call with to say, okay, specifically, what is this phone system? How are we going to tackle this? Because for the most part, just in general, this is usually what happens. So when the person's inside of the office and they make a 911 call, they don't actually outpost their own individual phone number. They're going to outpost something what's called an ELAN, an emergency location identification number. And that phone number is going to be outpost for everybody on a particular floor. Going back to what my example was before, where I said, hey, you have a 10-story building and there's going to be one reporting zone for each one of the floors. Basically, one of these ELANs is going to be assigned to each one of those floors. And so you log into your phone in the office, the software sees that and says, oh, this person's on the 3rd floor because they're in this subnet range or they're connected to this individual switch port. We have a bunch of different ways that we track phones. But in any regard, this is the phone number that needs to be outposted. This is the ELAN that needs to be outposted. And so when they make that 911 call, comes to our cloud, we see the ELAN. That ELAN has a address plus dispatchable location attached to it. So that's what's presented to the PSAP. Now they leave the office, they go outside, they go home. Now when we detect that they're connected to that phone outside, we're going to put them in what's called undiscovered mode. And when they're in undiscovered mode, instead of an ELAN being their caller ID when they make a 911 call, we're going to use their actual extension. And they're going to be able to update themselves with that gatekeeper product because they're going to be updating their own individual phone number and giving their own individual home address. So they make that 911 call, comes to our cloud. We already have their phone number plus their home address loaded into our cloud, and then we're able to route the call. That's how we have to be able to have 2 different places, but be able to give 2 different addresses for the same phone number.
Great answer. One last question. How often does it scan the network, and do network settings have to be set to promiscuous to allow for that scanning?
So it really depends on you, on really how often you want it to be scanned. There's a setting in there where you can do it every 5 minutes or once a day. It's a customizable feature to be able to decide how often you scan the network.
So that is all the questions that we have. Thank you, Kevin, so much for your time today and for sharing all of this expertise. This is such great information. Like I said, you guys, you will be receiving a link to the on-demand in the very near future as soon as we can get that prepared and sent out to you guys. And also keep an eye out because we will have another webinar in the E911 series coming up in September, and we'll be sending everyone an invite for that. I don't have anything else. Kevin, did you have anything else you'd like to say before we close?
I do. So one last thing that I wanted to say before we close is everybody who's here listening to this webinar, whether you use our solution or another, that's the biggest thing. We just want customers to have a solution. I mean, I've been doing this for 15 years and I'm very passionate about this because I've seen what happens when it doesn't go right. When somebody makes a 911 call, the call gets routed to the wrong place. Obviously you can reach out to me, but do your homework. This is supposed to be educational and let people know, hey, these are the things that are available in the industry, and these are the things to think about when you're choosing a 911 provider. So, thanks again to Waterfield for allowing me to be part of this presentation or webinar. And Angela, thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for your time. Have a great day.
All right, bye, everybody.
Bye.